In this video, Jordan Peterson explains how you can connect with people by listening to them and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations.
We organize our brains by talking. And so if you don't have someone to listen to you, well, especially if it's over a few decades, you're going to have a brain that's like a whole forest of trees that it needs a forest fire. It doesn't need just some, trimming. It's really in trouble. So you need to have someone to listen to you. And the best way to get someone like that is to find a bunch of people and listen to them. Because, of course, then that's a friendship. That's a real friendship, because you're both trying to move towards a better place, whatever that place is. And it's a great relationship then. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But if you try it, you'll discover it's one of the most difficult things you've ever tried to do. However, once you've been able to see the other person's point of view, your own comments will have to be drastically revised. Well, that's partly because now their sort of vague complaint is tightened up to a specific problem. Well, then you have to reconfigure how you're responding to address that problem. You will also find the emotion going out of the discussion, the differences being reduced, and those differences which remain being of a rational and understandable sort. If you are really willing to understand a person in this way, if you're willing to enter their private world and see the way their life appears to them, you run the risk of being changed yourself, that's a good thing. If you're involved in a real conversation, the way that you will change will be beneficial to you, but it's a challenging thing because it'll mean that you can't stick to the little, rigid framework that you had entering into the argument. You have to loosen that up and be willing to open the door and change the walls of your house. You might see it his way. That wouldn't be good. You might find yourself influenced in your attitudes or personality. The risk of being changed is one of the most frightening prospects most of us can face. Well, imagine, so you're trying to build yourself into a fully fledged you. Well, here's one way of doing it. Just hang around with people like you who think the same way you do. And then whenever you talk, they just reflect back what you have to say. Or you can start putting yourself in situations that you're uncomfortable with. Pushing yourself a little bit. And you go out where there are people that aren't like you. And then you think, well, how am I going to get to understand these people? And the first thing you do is you got to pay attention and you got to listen. And then maybe you'll be able to interact with them. And then, poof, that's another environment that you've mastered. And then there's more of you, because now you can operate here and here. And then maybe you think, well, that was kind of fun, so now I'll go here, and I'll try this. And you go there, and you listen, and you pay attention, and all of a sudden, bang, you can operate there. And if you do that over like a 15-year period, you'll be someone who can go anywhere. And not fit in exactly. That's like you're invisible. It's not like you're fitting in. It's like you can operate there. You can talk and listen, you can gather information, you can trade. You're useful there. And then you're not going to run up against people and, risk unnecessary conflict. Because if you listen to people, you just cannot believe what people will tell you if you listen to them. It is if you can listen to people, they will tell you profound things so fast that it just makes your head spin. Because people are really weird creatures. They're like Dostoevsky characters. They're peculiar. They think in weird ways, and they have weird experiences and bizarre dreams and ideas about the future and political theories. They're just as crazy as you could possibly imagine. And if you listen to them, they'll tell you why they think these things. And it's not boring. That's another issue, is if the conversation's boring, you are not listening. Because if you're listening, the conversation will change so that it won't be boring. So you can tell if you're in a conversation that's boring, someone at least is not listening. And it could easily be you. If I enter as fully as I am able into the private world of the neurotic or psychotic individual, isn't there a risk that I might become lost in that world? Most of us are afraid to take that risk. The great majority of us cannot listen. We find ourselves compelled to evaluate. And the evaluation is, I'm going to keep you away. I'm going to pigeonhole you, classify you, make the classification negative, describe you as irrelevant, and push you aside. Because then I don't have to pay attention to you. I don't have to listen. And I can stay in my box of certainty, my little narrow box of certainty. The great majority of us cannot listen. We find ourselves compelled to evaluate because listening is too dangerous. The first requirement is courage, and we do not always have it. Okay, so Carl Rogers. He's a phenomenologist, so he thinks it's your experience that's real. You need to represent that experience. And you need to communicate it to other people. And you have to communicate it within a frame. And the proper frame is, we're trying to make things better here. And, in order to adopt that frame, that's not just a simple statement, right? I mean, you can tell yourself that and try to put yourself in that state of mind. But to do that, you have to really think through your value hierarchy. You have to decide, like, what are you up to? Are you here to make things worse, or are you here to make things better? And, you might say, well, clearly I'm here to make things better. It's like, yeah, sure, no, that's hard. And people are full of resentment and fear and anger, and they've been hurt in all sorts of ways, and they want to take revenge, and they're just full of contradictory impulses. And so, to weave all those contradictory impulses together and to overcome all those hurts and disappointments and reasons for revenge and resentment, you've got to do all that before you can say, well, I'm here to make things better. Because if you're still possessed by those sorts of experiences and contradictions, you're going to be motivated to make things worse all the time, just out of revenge and spite. You've been hurt, you're going to hurt. And so, to adopt the framework that Rogers is talking about, it's a difficult enterprise. And partly it'll come about the more you listen, because the more you listen and you have the chance to exchange information, the more you'll deal with those inner contradictions and that sort of collection of hurts and irritations that are corrupting you and twisting you in the wrong direction. So the Rogerian perspective is extremely useful. It's very useful. The reason I concentrated on that one quote of his today is because that's such a useful thing. You can try it right away. The next time you're talking to someone, maybe you have a friend who wants to talk things over. It's like, listen to them. And then when there's a pause, say, well, it sounds to me like this is what you meant. And they'll go, yes, that's exactly what I meant. Maybe, if you were really listening, they'll be real happy about that because they didn't know what they meant. They're just telling you this story about why they're annoying. And so then you'll think, oh, wow, I got it. And then they'll be happy and they'll tell you something else. And they'll walk away from that conversation much lighter. And you will too, even though it's a weird thing because you might think, well, if you listen, people are going to dump a bunch of trouble on you. It's like, well, yes, but if you're willing to listen despite the fact that there might be a bunch of trouble dumped on you, then you've also told yourself that you're the sort of person that can tolerate having a bunch of trouble dumped on yourself. And that's an extremely positive attitude to take towards yourself. And you're not just saying it, you're acting it out. And so that's a sign of faith in yourself. And you're not well, I said you were stupid, like you are in relationships, but you're not totally stupid. You'll be able to notice that you've been willing to expose yourself to a risk. And when your body and your mind are watching that, they'll think, oh, I'm the sort of thing that can voluntarily expose itself to a risk. Well, that's like the secret to making yourself strong. It's exposure. And so you can do that in every conversation. And that toughens you up, as well as informing you. It's a very powerful technique, so I would recommend try it, see what happens. It's also fun because it's like you're following a thread of the conversation. If you're really listening, the conversation will continue, and it continues in a meaningful way. And then you know that you're in the right place, and it's like a challenge to your capacity to pay attention. And then you get engaged in all conversations. You get engaged in them, and then you're in engaging conversations all the time. That's a good thing. So, okay, we'll see you Thursday.